It was Christmas night and the kind of cold that made the air feel sharp pressed against the windows of our EMS station. I had been on shift since early morning running calls that ranged from a minor fall on an icy porch to a heart attack that had taken all of my focus and left me drained, but steady. The roads outside were nearly empty now, blanketed in a thin layer of snow that glittered beneath the streetlights. Inside, everything was quieter than usual. My partner was resting in the back room half asleep in a recliner, and I sat at the small metal table near the radio, sipping lukewarm coffee and trying to ignore the ache that always crept into my bones during long winter shifts. Christmas had never been a warm holiday for me, but this year it felt colder. I had told my family earlier in the week that I would be working and could not make dinner. They responded the way they always did, with disappointment sharp enough to cut through any words. My mother said we were all used to my absence. My sister Monica texted that she guessed family was not a priority for me. My older brother Brent sent a thumbs up, which somehow stung more than actual anger. Still, even with all that lingering in the back of my mind, I felt a small sense of peace sitting there in the dim quiet, knowing that at least no one could hurt me while I was on duty. I thought the worst of the night had already passed. Then my phone vibrated across the tabletop. The caller ID showed an unfamiliar number from downtown. I hesitated for a moment, expecting a wrong number, or maybe a misdial from someone who had one too many drinks celebrating the holiday. I answered anyway because habit was ingrained in me. "This is Emily." A man cleared his throat on the other end. "Miss Dawson, this is the manager at Maple House Restaurant." I assumed he was calling about some community outreach thing, or maybe a dropped wallet they needed help returning. I told him he might have the wrong person. He paused long enough for my stomach to tighten. "Your family just had dinner here, ma'am. They said you were on your way with your card, but you never arrived." I sat up straighter, cold rippling through me in a slow wave. "I am sorry," I said, convinced I had misheard him. "My family did what?" "They told us you were coming to settle the bill." His voice was professional, but heavy, as if he was bracing for how I might react. "They insisted you were parking your car and would be in shortly. When you did not show, they left." I could hear the clatter of dishes and faint voices behind him, the closing shift winding down. I should have spoken. I should have said something to correct the misunderstanding. But my tongue felt glued to the roof of my mouth. My family had gone out to a holiday dinner without inviting me, which was painful enough. But telling a restaurant that I would pay for it was something else entirely. Something calculated. Something mean. I forced myself to breathe evenly. "Sir, I said I was not with them. I am working tonight." He inhaled softly, almost sadly. "I thought so. Before we go further, you should see something. There is a camera at our payment counter. It recorded the entire checkout interaction. If you can come by, I think it would be better than explaining over the phone." A familiar heaviness settled in my chest, the kind that told me this was not a misunderstanding. This was intentional. I told him I would be there in 15 minutes. My partner stayed asleep as I grabbed my coat and stepped outside. The wind cut through the air like a blade, and the snow crunched under my boots. I drove through quiet streets, my hands trembling so badly on the wheel that I had to keep tightening my grip. Every mile brought back old memories I thought I had buried. Times they had left me behind. Times I had paid so they would not fight in public. Times they had laughed when I cried. By the time the restaurant came into view, my heart was beating hard enough to make my vision pulse. Maple House stood glowing with warm, yellow lights wrapped around its windows. A wreath hung crookedly on the front door, and inside I could see staff stacking chairs and wiping down tables. The world looked peaceful, but I felt anything but. The manager met me at the entrance. He looked to be in his 50s, with tired eyes and a polite expression that carried traces of embarrassment on my behalf. "Miss Dawson, thank you for coming. Come with me." He led me through the empty dining area toward the counter where customers usually paid before leaving. Behind it was a small office with a computer monitor already pulled up to a paused security frame. Before he pressed play, he said quietly, "I am sorry you have to see this." The video began. My father stood at the counter, pointing at the printed bill as if it offended him. My mother stood beside him, arms crossed, wearing the same tight frown she used whenever my name came up. Monica leaned on the counter, bored and scrolling her phone. Brent laughed at something I could not hear yet. Then the audio kicked in. My mother said Emily will take care of this. She always does. My brother added, You know how she is, the responsible one. Monica shrugged and said, It is Christmas. She owes us. They all laughed as if it were the most natural thing in the world. I watched them gather their coats, still joking as they walked out the door, leaving the bill behind without looking back. The manager paused the video, his voice softened. Ma, they said you were coming. We would not normally allow a group to leave without settling their balance, but they were very certain. I could not find my voice. I stood frozen, feeling something inside me go quiet. The kind of quiet that comes right before a part of you breaks for the last time. When I finally breathed again, it felt sharp enough to hurt, and in that moment, I understood that nothing about this was accidental. Do you want me to write up the total for you? He asked gently. I nodded, unable to look away from the screen. It was $1,200. I paid it without a word. As I signed the receipt, a strange clarity washed over me. This night was not just another wound, it was a turning point, and whatever came next would not look like the years I had spent swallowing pain to keep someone else comfortable. The cold night air slapped my face as I stepped outside, but this time I did not flinch. I was done being predictable. I was done being used. And for the first time, I felt something close to resolve warming beneath the ice. Growing up in Ohio, I learned early that some families do not feel like shelter, but more like storms you spend your entire childhood trying to outrun. Our house sat on a quiet street in a working-class neighborhood, the kind where people waved to each other while mowing their lawns and borrowed tools without asking questions. From the outside, we looked like any other family trying to get by, but the inside felt different, charged with a tension so familiar I did not realize it was wrong until much later. My father worked long hours as a truck driver, and when he came home, he carried exhaustion on his shoulders like a second skin. He was not a monster, at least not in the way people imagine when they hear the word violent. He was simply a man who never learned what to do with his anger, so he poured it into the closest container he could find, which was usually me. My mother avoided conflict the way some people avoid thunderstorms. She kept her voice soft, her movements quiet, and believed that staying silent was the same as keeping peace. She did not raise her hand at anyone, but she did not raise her voice either, and her silence became its own kind of harm. My siblings learned quickly what roles earned approval in our house. Brent, the eldest, was the golden boy without question. He was loud, confident, reckless, and for reasons I could never understand, my parents adored every impulsive decision he made. Monica, 2 years older than me, learned to mirror whatever expression my mother wore. She mastered the art of looking delicate and helpless, which made everyone rush to protect her. Then there was me, quiet, anxious, a little too observant, always trying to make sense of things that made no sense. My father claimed I was sensitive in the same tone someone else might use to describe a broken appliance. Whenever something was misplaced or spilled or forgotten, he assumed it was my fault. And whenever he was angry, which was often, I was the one who stood closest to the blast. The violence in our home was not cinematic. It was not bruises that sent you to the hospital. It was the everyday kind people dismiss because it hides behind closed doors and polite Sunday greetings. It was slammed cabinets, raised voices, fingers digging into my arm when he was tired of repeating himself, the sudden sting of a palm across my cheek when frustration boiled over. It was the crash of a plate hitting the wall while my mother whispered, "Please stop," under her breath, even though she knew he would not. The moment that etched itself into me happened when I was 10. Our extended family had come over for a holiday meal, and the house smelled of baked ham and cinnamon. I carried a stack of plates to the dining room, trying to walk carefully so I would not drop anything. But my hands were small, and the plates were heavy, and one slid from the top. It shattered on the hardwood floor. In any other house, someone would have helped me clean it up. In ours, everything went silent. My father stood up so fast his chair scraped the floor, and before I could apologize, he slapped me sharp and sudden in front of everyone. The sound echoed louder than the breaking plate. My cheeks burned not from pain, but humiliation. No one said anything. No one stood between us. My mother looked down at her lap. Brent smirked. Monica looked at me with wide eyes, more curious than concerned, and the rest of the adults just kept eating. That was the day I learned that in my family, my suffering was not an accident, it was tradition. As I grew older, the dynamic never changed. If Brent forgot to pay a bill, I heard about responsibility. If Monica cried after an argument, I heard about empathy. But if I spoke up about anything, I heard only criticism. They called me dramatic whenever I reacted to their harshness, even though I had spent my childhood swallowing every reaction until it soured in my stomach. They called me ungrateful whenever I needed help, even though I had learned to stop asking because the request itself seemed to disappoint them. The strangest part was that I still kept trying. Every birthday, every holiday, every moment I thought might turn into something good. I walked into that house hoping for a softness I had never known. I clung to the idea that if I worked harder, stayed quieter, proved myself more useful, they might eventually see me as something other than the child who caused problems. But no matter what I did, the imbalance stayed the same. They praised Brent for showing up late. They comforted Monica for causing a scene. They expected me to hold everything together while pretending I was not breaking under the weight of it all. People sometimes ask why children from violent homes do not leave sooner, but they do not understand the way fear becomes routine. It becomes a place where you memorize the exits and measure the volume of each footstep. You learn to shrink yourself so small that maybe the anger will pass over you. For years, I thought peace meant minimizing myself. I thought love meant endurance. I thought family meant survival. It was not until I moved out at 18 that I realized how much of my childhood had been shaped by silence. No slammed doors in my apartment. No raised voices echoing through thin walls. No footsteps that made me brace for impact. At first, the quiet felt wrong like a trick. I did not trust it. I kept waiting for something to explode. But as the years went by, I found that the world outside my childhood home did not operate on fear. People spoke kindly. Mistakes did not end in shouting. Accidents did not equal punishment. Still, even with distance, the imprint of that house followed me. It shaped how I reacted, how I apologized too quickly, how I took responsibility for things that were not mine, how I stayed silent even when silence harmed me. What I did not know then was that those patterns were exactly why my family continued to treat me the same way long after I became an adult. They carried the same expectations. I carried the same guilt, and that was the perfect recipe for exploitation. Christmas night at Maple House was not the beginning of their cruelty. It was simply the moment I finally saw it without the haze of hope. Emily entered adulthood carrying the kind of quiet resilience that grows in the cracks of a difficult childhood, but stepping into the world did not magically erase the weight she had carried for so long. When I moved into my first apartment at 18, a tiny studio with peeling linoleum and a heater that rattled like a dying engine, I felt both terrified and strangely powerful. No one yelled when I dropped something, no one scolded me for leaving a light on, and no one watched my every movement as if waiting for a misstep. The silence was foreign, but it was mine, and for the first time I could breathe without bracing for impact. I applied to an EMS training program because I wanted a job that meant something, a job that would make me feel useful in a way that did not depend on appeasing someone else's anger. EMS work was grueling, physically demanding, and emotionally exhausting, but it taught me that strength and compassion could exist together without fear. I learned how to stay calm while someone fought for their life in the back of my ambulance, how to deliver CPR with steady rhythm, and how to comfort families who were living the worst moment of their lives. It gave me a purpose that did not revolve around my family's needs, and that alone felt like enough to keep me going. Still, even as my skills grew, my confidence did not. I apologized constantly, even on calls where I had done nothing wrong. I always assumed I was the problem whenever something went sideways. My supervisors noticed my dedication, but they also noticed the way I flinched when someone raised their voice, even if they were not talking to me. Trauma does not disappear just because you have moved to a new address. It follows you in small, stubborn ways. Over the years, I built a life that looked stable from the outside. I bought a used car, adopted a cat, and saved enough money to finally move out of the studio and into a small one-bedroom apartment on the third floor of a brick building not far from downtown. The walls were thick enough to keep out the noise, and the windows let in warm light in the mornings. It was the first place that ever felt like home, but even there I kept waiting for something to break. My family did not help me move. They did not congratulate me. They only asked how much I paid and whether I could afford it on an EMS salary. Whenever I tried to share something positive, they found a way to turn it sour. "Good for you," my mother would say in a tone that made the words feel like an insult. Brent joked that I should not get too comfortable because apartments like that often had mold. Monica said she hoped I would not call them crying when the bills piled up. Their words stung, but I told myself it was normal for families to tease. It took years to realize that teasing is not supposed to feel like a warning shot. As time passed, the pattern grew clearer. Whenever the family went out to eat, they expected me to come and they expected me to pay because I was the one with the steady job. They acted like my work was easy compared to theirs, even though they had no idea what it meant to kneel in the snow beside a bleeding stranger or hold pressure on a wound while someone screamed for help. They treated my paycheck like a communal resource, something they could draw from whenever they wanted. If my father needed car repairs, he called me first. If Monica wanted to borrow money for a flight, she texted me. If Brent got behind on rent, he assumed I would spot him until payday. They never offered to repay anything, and if I dared to mention it, they said I was selfish for keeping score. For a long time, I believed them. I thought being a good daughter meant carrying every burden they placed on me. I thought family meant sacrifice, and I thought saying no made me ungrateful. I worked long shifts, slept little, and spent my days off running errands for people who did not appreciate me. When I finally managed to buy my own condo, a small but bright place on the edge of town, I felt like I had climbed a mountain I had been told my whole life I could never reach. Instead of celebrating with me, my family asked how much they could store in my new place. They asked if they could throw parties there because parking was better in my neighborhood. They hinted that since I finally had a real home, I should host Christmas from now on. My mother even said it was only fair because I was the one who had benefited most from everyone's support, a statement so backward I spent hours trying to understand what she meant. My work became my refuge. The ambulance felt safer than my childhood home ever had. The chaos made sense because it followed rules. The injuries were logical. The emergencies were real, not manufactured through guilt and manipulation. I saved lives. I held hands. I stayed strong during trauma calls, and people thanked me. Sometimes they cried with relief. Sometimes they hugged me. It felt strange to be appreciated for doing something hard when my own family treated everything I did as expected, owed, or insignificant. But even in the stability I created, there was always a shadow trailing behind me, a reminder that my family would always find a way to pull me back into the role they had assigned me since childhood. I was the responsible one, the dependable one, the invisible one. I was still carrying more than I realized. Christmas in my family was never about joy or warmth or the kind of togetherness people talk about when they describe holiday magic. For us, it was a stage where old grudges resurfaced, expectations tightened like a noose, and every emotion I had spent the year suppressing found its way back to the surface whether I wanted it to or not. Still, every December I tried to pretend things would be different. I tried to imagine a version of my family that cared more about each other than about keeping up appearances. But the truth was always waiting just beneath the surface, ready to remind me who I was in their eyes. Growing up Christmas morning belonged to Brent and Monica. They had mountains of gifts piled under the tree-shiny boxes and bags filled with clothes, electronics, and things they would brag about to their friends. I usually had a few smaller presents, though my parents always insisted that the value of gifts should not be measured in dollars. But even as a child, I knew there was a difference between thrift and favoritism. My siblings tore into their gifts while I tried to muster excitement for whatever my mother handed me. One year, it was a used coat that smelled faintly of someone else's perfume. Another year, it was an alarm clock shaped like a football, even though I had never cared about sports. My parents told me I should be grateful because they remembered to include me as if my existence were an afterthought in their celebration. When I grew older, Christmas shifted from being a day of quiet resentment to becoming a list of responsibilities. I cooked, I cleaned, I wrapped gifts my siblings were too busy to handle, and I covered last-minute expenses my parents claimed they could not afford. They praised me when I worked behind the scenes to make everything perfect, but they acted like I was selfish if I dared to mention being tired. "You are good at this," my mother would say whenever I tried to step back. "You are reliable. Someone has to hold things together. That someone was always me. Meanwhile, Brent and Monica did as they pleased. Brent brought his girlfriends to dinner without warning, leaving me to set extra places at the table. Monica arrived late with a dramatic sigh, claiming she was exhausted from shopping, then sat down like royalty while I rushed around trying to make sure everything was ready. And every year, when the bill for groceries or takeout or last-minute desserts came due, all eyes turned to me. They never asked. They simply assumed. Over time, I stopped questioning it. I stopped hoping for anything different. But the resentment built quietly inside me like a slow leak in a pipe, and even though I kept patching it with excuses and silence, the pressure never really went away. This past Christmas was supposed to be different. At least, that is what I told myself. I had been working long shifts leading up to the holiday, and my supervisor had already assigned me to cover the 25th. It was not ideal, but it felt strangely like relief. I would not have to sit at that table pretending to enjoy myself while waiting for the next insult or passive-aggressive jab to land. When I told my family about my schedule, I expected mild disappointment. Instead, they reacted like I had personally attacked the meaning of the season. My mother said she guessed my job was more important than the people who raised me. Brent muttered that I could have switched shifts if I really cared. Monica rolled her eyes and said, "Well, I hope work brings you comfort when you are alone on Christmas again." Their words sank into me like cold needles, familiar and predictable. Still, I felt a small weight lift off my chest. If I was working, I could not be responsible for any of the holiday duties they always dumped on me. For once, the burden might fall on someone else. I should have known better. The week before Christmas, my mother called me 3 separate times to ask if I could come by after work to help organize gifts. She asked me for money to cover part of the dinner because she claimed their budget was tight this year. She said the turkey Brent bought was too small and asked if I could pick up a second one on my way home. When I reminded her I was working 12-hour shifts, she sighed dramatically, and I could almost see her pinching the bridge of her nose the way she did whenever she wanted me to feel guilty. I tried to stay firm, but the guilt seeped in anyway. Years of conditioning do not disappear because you tell yourself they should. On Christmas morning before my shift started, I received a text from Monica. "The family wants to know if you are coming after all. I told her no, I was on duty until late that night." She responded with a single sentence that tightened something in my chest. Figures. You never show up when it matters. I put my phone away and told myself it did not matter. I told myself their disappointment could not reach me while I was wearing my uniform while I was focused on saving lives. But deep down, I still felt like that child holding a broken plate while the room stared. That is the thing about family guilt. It does not need distance or logic. It lives in your bones. What I did not know that morning was that everything I feared about them, everything I had spent years trying to shrink and swallow and ignore, would come back to me in a way so blatant I could no longer deny it. And it would happen in the one moment I was not even there. Maple House felt strangely hollow when I walked back inside after parking my ambulance along the curb. The warm lights, the wreath on the door, the faint smell of roasted herbs that lingered in the air from dinner service, none of it softened the weight in my chest. The manager led me toward the payment counter again, and for a moment the room seemed too bright, too clean, too calm for what I knew I was about to see. He clicked on the computer monitor, and the screen illuminated the small area where customers checked out. Unlike the dining room, this spot had audio and a clear view of the register, the countertop, and the walkway leading toward the exit. Nothing about it felt invasive or unusual. It was standard for restaurants, which made the reality of what my family had done even harder to process. The manager asked if I was ready before he pressed play. I nodded, though my throat tightened until it felt like swallowing glass. The video began with the soft chime of the restaurant door still open behind my family as they approached the counter. My father walked up, first shoulders stiff, scanning the printed bill with the irritated look he wore whenever something cost more than he thought it should. My mother hovered, close arms folded across her chest, as if she wanted to appear inconvenienced, even though she had spent a holiday meal she never invited me to. Monica was behind them, leaning one elbow lazily on the counter, her phone in her hand, scrolling with that detached disinterest she always displayed when anything required responsibility. Brent stood back with a grin, nudging Monica with his elbow before whispering something I could not hear just yet. The video shifted slightly as the manager adjusted the volume. Then their voices filled the tiny office. My father jabbed a finger at the bill. "This is ridiculous. I swear they raise the price every time we come here." My mother responded instantly. "Well, Emily will take care of this. She always does." She said it casually, like it was a fact, a universal truth, not something they had invented to avoid paying for their own dinner. My father did not correct her. He nodded like the matter was settled. The young cashier behind the counter clearly knew, or at least unprepared for what was unfolding, hesitated. Do you mean someone else in your party is coming to pay?" My mother gave a long, exasperated sigh, the kind she reserved for moments when she wanted people to believe she had suffered deeply. "Yes, our daughter is on her way," she said. "She works nearby. She is always responsible for these things." "Always responsible," I repeated silently. The phrase tasted like old metal in my mouth. The cashier looked uncertain, but before he could question them further, Brent stepped forward with a grin. "Do not worry. She said she would be here any minute. Emily is reliable. You know how she is." The cashier nodded reluctantly, still nervous, but trying to be polite. "If your daughter is coming right away, that is fine," he said, switching the bill into a temporary holding folder. My family practically lit up with relief. My mother laughed lightly. "See? I told you. She owes us. It is Christmas." The words hit me like a physical blow. Monica rolled her eyes dramatically. If she actually cared about family, she would have been here earlier. "But she can at least pay the bill." Brent laughed a sharp sound that vibrated with ugly amusement. "Remember that time she cried for hours after Dad slapped her for dropping a plate? He said it like a party story, something funny, something shared." My stomach twisted painfully. My father snorted without even pretending to be embarrassed. "She has always been dramatic, always too emotional." The video captured all of it, every casual cruelty, every piece of revisionist history they proudly shared. They acted like my suffering was entertainment. They acted like my pain was a tradition they had all agreed to uphold. The cashier looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. "Are you sure she is okay with this?" Brent shrugged. "She pays for our meals all the time. It is not a big deal." My mother added, "She is our daughter. That is what family is for. Family is for support. Family is for helping each other." I could not believe how easily she twisted the word support into something parasitic. Then my family started gathering their coats, talking over one another as they prepared to leave. My father adjusted his jacket and said, "She knows her place. She will take care of it. She always does." They walked out the door, laughing, their silhouettes shrinking as the camera watched them step into the night without a second thought. Without shame. Without care. The video ended with the cashier turning to look toward the door, his expression uncertain and maybe even sympathetic. The manager paused the footage and lowered his hands to the desk. "Miss Dawson," he said softly, "I thought you needed to see it for yourself." I stood frozen as humiliation flushed through me like lightning under my skin. I had imagined every version of family disappointment, every cold glance, every unnecessary insult. But nothing compared to watching them lie so naturally, so comfortably, using my name as a shield to avoid accountability. My mother's voice echoed in my mind that casual cruelty that came so easily to her. She owes us. It is Christmas. In that moment, something inside me did not just hurt. It shifted. The pain did not rise or explode. It condensed, turning sharp and clear like a blade forged under pressure. I finally understood that what happened tonight was not an isolated incident. It was the crystallization of every pattern they had built around me since childhood. And I knew with a certainty that made my hands tremble that I could never let this happen again. Walking out of Maple House with the receipt still warm in my hand felt like stepping into a different version of the night one where the air seemed thinner and every breath scraped against my ribs. The snow had grown heavier, brushing against my cheeks in soft, cold bursts as I made my way to the ambulance parked outside. The city streets were quiet, lit mostly by street lamps reflecting off patches of ice, but the silence inside me was louder than anything around me. I sat in the driver's seat for a long moment staring at the glowing dashboard while my hands remained motionless on my lap. I expected tears. My whole life humiliation had always been followed by tears like a reflex I could not control. But now nothing came. No shaking, no sobbing, no frantic heartbeat. Just an unsettling stillness that made me feel like an entirely different person had taken over my body. I replayed the words I had heard in that small office, their voices rising and falling with that familiar mixture of entitlement and disdain. She owes us. She is always responsible. She knows her place. It is Christmas. Each sentence echoed through me like distant thunder, not loud enough to break me, but steady enough to reshape the ground beneath my feet. I had always known on some level that my family saw me differently than they saw each other. But tonight was the first time I saw the way they talked about me when I was not there, free of the false politeness they sometimes draped over their cruelty. They believed I was born to serve them. They believed I would always pay, always fix, always carry whatever they decided to drop at my feet. And the worst part was that I had spent years proving them right without realizing it. Every memory crashed into me sharp and fast, like flipping through pages of a book I no longer wanted to read. Every holiday I had organized, every bill I had covered without complaint, every ride I had given in the middle of the night, every time I swallowed an apology that was owed to me because I did not want to start a fight, every moment I had let myself believe that doing more would make them love me, or at least treat me like I mattered. But I saw now that nothing I ever did had changed them. They did not see my efforts as care. They saw them as obligation. They did not see my generosity as love. They saw it as proof that I knew my place. The snow outside was falling harder, tapping against the windshield in uneven rhythms. I pressed my head back against the seat and closed my eyes, letting the cold seeping through the glass settle against my skin. For the first time, the memories did not make me feel small. They made me angry in a way that did not burn, but froze clean and bitter. I thought about the way Brent had joked about the slap from my childhood, the way Monica had said I owed them, the way my mother had lied so easily. It was not just disrespect. It was ownership. They truly believed they were entitled to my time, my money, my labor, my emotional stability. They acted as though the life I had built independently was still somehow theirs to direct. They treated me like a resource, not a person, and I had let them. That realization hit harder than anything they had said on camera. The truth was that I had been waiting my entire life for them to change. I kept hoping that if I worked harder, they would eventually see me, appreciate me, include me without conditions. But hope had become a chain. And tonight, watching them walk out of that restaurant without guilt or hesitation, I felt the chain snap. My breath steadied in a way that felt unfamiliar. My pulse slowed. The silence inside me took shape, no longer fragile, but grounded. This was not numbness. It was clarity. "They will never stop," I whispered to myself as I watched the snow blur the edges of the street. "Not unless I stop them." That sentence settled through me like an anchor dropping. It was not dramatic or emotional. It was simple truth. They had treated me like this for so long because I had allowed it. Not because I was weak, but because I had been conditioned to believe love required endurance. I thought letting things go made me the bigger person. But now, I saw that letting things go had only made the cycle stronger. I had tried to earn peace by sacrificing myself, and all it had given me was a life where humiliation came wrapped in holiday traditions. The realization spread through my chest, slowly warming the parts of me that had always felt cold. I did not want revenge. I did not want to scream at them. I did not want an apology that would only be offered to save face. What I wanted was separation, boundaries, a life where my worth was not measured by what I could provide to people who had decided I did not deserve basic respect. I looked at the crumpled receipt on the passenger seat, the total circled in blue pen. $1,200. A number that would sting my bank account but not ruin me. A number they assumed I would cover simply because they believed my life belonged to them. They were wrong. For the first time, the thought did not feel rebellious. It felt inevitable. I turned the key in the ignition and let the engine rumble to life, the headlights cutting through the snow. As I pulled away from the curb, a sense of finality settled over me. Tonight was the last time they would use me without consequence. Tonight was the last time I would play the role they had written for me. Whatever came next would not be about protecting their feelings or maintaining the illusion of family harmony. It would be about reclaiming my life piece by piece, starting now. Driving back toward the EMS station, I felt the beginnings of a plan forming in the quiet space the shock had left behind. It did not arrive as a burst of rage or a sudden impulse. It unfolded slowly like a curtain being pulled back to reveal something I had somehow known all along. My family thrived in spaces without accountability. They operated in whispers and assumptions in the shadows where humiliation could be dismissed as jokes and manipulations could be disguised as traditions. The only reason their cruelty worked was because it was always hidden. It lived inside our home, inside phone calls no one else heard, inside expectations spoken in tones that made refusal feel impossible. But what I saw at Maple House was not hidden. It was recorded. It was documented. It was real enough for a stranger to recognize it as wrong. And that alone changed everything. I parked the ambulance behind the station and sat for a moment, letting the engine tick as it cooled. The snow had lightened slightly, drifting in soft flakes across the streetlights. Normally, I found beauty in winter nights like this, but tonight the cold felt sharper, more purposeful, as if the world were preparing itself for something inevitable. Inside the station, my partner was still asleep in the recliner, the radio crackling quietly with distant calls from other districts. I walked past him and into the supply room, needing a moment alone. The harsh fluorescent lights buzzed above me as I leaned against the counter and let my thoughts settle into place. Every instinct I had honed over years of EMS work told me that timing mattered. Acting while raw emotion still pulsed in my veins would only give my family ammunition to twist the narrative. They would claim I was overreacting. They would say I misunderstood. They would insist the restaurant exaggerated. They would lie with the same ease they breathed. If I confronted them privately, it would be their word against mine. If I confronted them individually, they would unite against me out of habit. But if I confronted them publicly with proof during a gathering they expected to control, they would not have the space to manipulate the story. They would be forced to face themselves in front of people they respected. Shame was the only language they ever responded to, even if they would never admit it. And Christmas provided the perfect opportunity. In our family, the day after Christmas had always been reserved for the Boxing Day gathering at my Aunt Karen's house. It was a tradition passed down from her Canadian side of the family, something my mother loved because it made us appear cultured and close-knit. Every year, relatives from both sides came together for food, drinks, and gift exchanges. It was the one event my parents cared about hosting well because it gave them an audience. It was also the one event where they behaved at least on the surface. No yelling, no insults, no open displays of dysfunction. Everything was curated, polished, presentable, which meant exposing the truth there in that environment would cut deeper than any confrontation I could engineer in private. It would force them to face not just me, but the stability of their own reputations. And best of all, it would strip their favorite shield away. They could not claim I misheard. They could not claim things were taken out of context. They could not twist the story into something palatable. The camera footage was indisputable. Their words were unmistakable. Their intentions were undeniable. Before doing anything else, I needed the evidence secured. The next morning, once my shift ended, I drove back to Maple House. The manager recognized me instantly and invited me inside before the restaurant opened for lunch service. His kindness felt like a balm against the harshness of the night before. I asked if he could print a copy of the receipt, including the timestamp and the note that it had been left unpaid by the party before mine. He printed it and signed the bottom, indicating it was authentic. Then I asked if he could provide a digital copy of the checkout footage. He nodded without hesitation. "Of course, Miss Dawson. What your family did was wrong, and you deserve to have proof." He downloaded the clip onto a flash drive and handed it to me with both hands. Holding it felt strangely symbolic, like holding the truth in physical form. A truth I had never been given growing up. A truth no one could take away from me now. As I left, he said quietly, "I hope whatever you choose to do brings you peace." Peace. The word lingered in my mind as I walked to my car. For the first time in my life, peace felt reachable. Not because someone might give it to me, but because I could create it myself. I drove home after picking up a few hours of sleep, still half running on adrenaline and clarity. Sitting at my small dining table with the flash drive in front of me, I opened my notebook and started writing. Not emotional thoughts, not grievances, just facts, dates, comments they had made, patterns of behavior, the unpaid bills, the manipulated obligations, the Christmas traditions that had always centered around my labor. The slap historical moment they now treated as comedy. Every detail that showed this was not a one-time oversight but a lifetime of expectation. I was not gathering evidence for revenge. I was gathering evidence for closure. It struck me how calm I felt while writing, how steady my hand remained, even as I documented things that once would have sent me spiraling. The plan was not about hurting them. It was about stopping them. I decided I would attend the Boxing Day gathering exactly as they expected. I would walk in quietly, blend into the background, and let them believe nothing had changed. Then, once everyone arrived and settled, I would ask for a moment to speak, and I would not raise my voice. I would not cry. I would not tremble. I would simply play the footage and let the truth speak for itself. It was not dramatic. It was not vengeful. It was necessary. And for the first time, I felt like the ground beneath me was solid. In the hours leading up to the Boxing Day gathering, my mind kept drifting back to moments I thought I had buried for good memories that surfaced not with violence, but with a soft, persistent ache that felt almost louder than the actual incidents. Trauma has a way of echoing in the quiet, returning not as scenes, but as sensations, fragments, sounds you cannot quite unhear. The slap Brent joked about in the restaurant footage was only one piece of a larger mosaic, one example that fit neatly into their revisionist history because it was simple to retell. But what haunted me more were the smaller sounds, the subtle violence that shaped who I became long before I ever understood what it meant. I remembered the creak of the hallway floorboards at night, the way my father's steps sounded heavier when he had been drinking, how I used to hold my breath until he passed my door. I remembered the sound of plates rattling in the cabinet whenever he slammed the kitchen drawers, the muted thud of a fist hitting the table when he wanted to make a point without technically crossing a line. I remembered the soft, muffled sob of my mother in the bathroom, always pretending she had allergies after every argument. I remembered my own footsteps light and cautious because I learned early not to draw attention if I wanted peace. But the moment that returned clearest came long before Maple House, long before the receipt and the video and the realization that my family saw me as little more than a tool. I must have been 12, sitting at the kitchen table doing homework while my mother and father argued in the living room. Their voices rose and fell in that familiar rhythm, sharp, then low, then sharp again, building like a storm forming overhead. I tried to focus on my math worksheet, but each word carried tension that made my stomach twist. I heard my father say something about bills, about how he worked too hard to come home to stress. My mother countered with something about him breaking another lamp and refusing to fix it. The argument escalated until I heard something crash against the wall, a sound so sudden it made my pencil slip across the page. When I peeked around the corner, I saw shards of a glass cup scattered across the floor, glinting like tiny stars in the lamplight. My mother stood frozen while my father paced, rubbing the back of his neck with that same restless anger I still recognized years later. Then he noticed me. His expression hardened in an instant. "Why are you staring?" he barked. I tried to back away, but he was already moving. He did not hit me that time. Instead, he grabbed the chair I had been sitting in, lifted it, and slammed it down hard enough that the legs splintered. The crack echoed through the house louder than the earlier shattering glass. I flinched so violently I dropped my notebook. My mother reached for him, but he shook her off with a grunt, muttering that if I did not want to see anger, I should stop provoking it. I had not said a word. I had not moved. I had simply existed in the wrong place at the wrong time. That moment lived inside me for years, not because of the force behind the chair, but because of the silence that followed. My mother picked up the pieces in quiet shame. Brent walked through the room without acknowledging anything, as if chaos were part of the furniture. Monica laughed nervously and said I should stop being so dramatic when I tried to explain later. I learned then that violence did not need to leave bruises to reshape a person. It only needed to be dismissed. Another memory surfaced as I prepared myself mentally for the gathering. A softer one, but in some ways more painful. I was 16, sitting in the back seat of the car while my family drove home from a cousin's birthday party. The night had been loud with music and laughter, but in the car, everything felt heavy. My father accused me of embarrassing the family because I had declined a drink someone offered me. He said my refusal made him look strict, made him look old-fashioned. My mother agreed without looking back at me. Brent made jokes about how uptight I was. Monica said I sucked the fun out of every room. I stared out the window, watching streetlights smear across the glass, and wished with every fiber of my being that someone would defend me. Just once. Not even wholeheartedly. Just a small gesture. But no one did. Each word they spoke dug deeper than any slap ever could, shaping my understanding of myself in ways I struggled to undo even years later. I carried that moment into adulthood without realizing it. I carried it into every decision I made. I carried it into the way I apologized too quickly, the way I assumed I was wrong before asking questions, the way I hesitated to take up space in any room I entered. And now, as I thought about facing them with evidence they could not twist, I felt those old shadows stirring, reminding me of the girl who learned to stay quiet. But this time I did not shrink beneath them. I let them pass through me like echoes from a life I no longer lived. The chair slamming, the glass breaking, the silence that followed, the laughter at my expense, the guilt that saturated every holiday. Each memory sharpened my resolve rather than weakening it. They were proof of a pattern one I finally saw clearly. The girl who once absorbed blame like a sponge was gone. The woman who took her place understood the power of truth spoken plainly. I knew my family would try to talk their way out of what they had done. I knew they would scramble for excuses. I knew they would reach for the same lies they had always used. But the footage provided something I never had before. A voice that could not be silenced. A moment that could not be rewritten. A truth I did not have to justify. The shadows of my past had always made me feel small, but now they felt like stepping stones. Each one led me closer to the moment where I would reclaim the narrative they had controlled for so long. For once, their voices would not be louder than mine. Boxing Day arrived with a sky the color of steel, heavy and unmoving as if the world itself were holding its breath. I woke early despite barely sleeping. My mind replaying every detail of the night at Maple House, the sound of their voices, the ease of their lies, the entitlement in their laughter. The flash drive sat on my nightstand like a silent witness, small and unassuming, yet containing the one thing my family had never been forced to face: the truth. I moved through my apartment quietly, making coffee, gathering the printed receipt, placing everything into a plain envelope I slipped into my bag. There was no dramatic preparation. No rehearsed speech, no emotional outburst simmering beneath the surface. There was only a steady calm, the kind that comes when the decision has already been made, long before the action. Boxing Day at Aunt Karen's house had always been an unspoken performance. Her home was larger than ours, decorated with polished wooden floors, framed photographs arranged with symmetry and Christmas garlands draped across banisters. Family members came dressed nicely, not formally, but polished enough to maintain the image that we were close-knit. It was the one event of the year where my parents behaved as if the whole world were watching. I arrived just as the sun began breaking through the gray clouds, casting pale light across the snow-covered yard. Cars lined the driveway, and the muffled sound of chatter drifted from inside. I inhaled deeply before stepping onto the front porch. The door swung open before I could knock. Aunt Karen greeted me with her usual warm expression, pulling me into a brief hug that smelled of cinnamon and laundry detergent. "Emily, honey, I am so glad you made it." Her sincerity caught me off guard for a moment, reminding me that not every relative in my orbit was blind to the realities of our family. I stepped inside, the warmth of the house enveloping me instantly. Coats hung neatly on hooks near the door. A soft, instrumental version of a Christmas song played from the living room. Voices carried over one another, cheerful, oblivious to the storm building quietly in my chest. My mother stood near the dining table arranging a platter of cookies, wearing a bright red sweater and a smile that only appeared during events where she wanted to be admired. My father was by the drink station talking loudly with Uncle Robert, his booming laugh echoing across the room. Brent leaned against the counter with a beer in his hand, recounting a story with exaggerated gestures while Monica posed for photos with cousins, making sure the angle favored her. None of them noticed me at first. When they finally did, it was with the same strained politeness they always saved for public settings. My mother offered me a brief hug that felt like a cold handshake. "You made it," she said, with a smile that did not reach her eyes. She did not apologize for Christmas. She did not acknowledge the dinner I had paid for. She did not even ask how my shift had gone. My father nodded stiffly. "Good to see you, kiddo," as if he had not thrown me under the bus 2 nights earlier. Monica offered a half-hearted wave before returning to her photos. Brent smirked, the expression carrying a flicker of something I could not quite name. Maybe guilt. Maybe amusement. Maybe both. I gave them all the same neutral smile, the same one I used on combative patients who insisted they were fine while refusing the treatment they desperately needed. Aunt Karen called everyone to the living room, gathering them for the traditional Boxing Day toast and gift exchange. People filled the sofas and armchairs while others stood along the walls. My mother beamed as she took her place near the center, clearly enjoying being at the hub of attention. I found a spot near the front, not close enough to stand beside any of them, but close enough to step forward when the time came. As relatives settled in, voices tapered off, creating a soft hum of anticipation. Normally, this part of the gathering involved my father giving a short speech about gratitude and family, a performance he repeated yearly without actually practicing the values he described. But today, I stepped forward before he had the chance. "Excuse me," I said, my tone calm and level. "Could I have a moment?" Every head turned toward me. Conversations died instantly. My mother blinked in surprise. My father frowned, annoyed at having the spotlight pulled away. Aunt Karen looked pleased, thinking perhaps I wanted to share holiday cheer. I reached into my bag and felt the envelope beneath my fingers, the weight of the truth steady and grounding. "I would like to share something from Christmas night," I said. A few relatives exchanged confused glances. My mother's smile twitched. My father's jaw tightened. Brent shifted his weight. Monica crossed her arms. I continued before any of them could interrupt. "The restaurant where you all had dinner called me that night. They said someone claimed I was on my way to pay your bill." A murmur rippled through the room, soft and uneasy. My mother laughed nervously. "Oh, Emily, I think you misunderstood." But her words sounded weak, brittle. I held up a hand. "I did not misunderstand, and I would appreciate not being interrupted." The firmness in my voice surprised even me. A hush fell over the room. Eyes widened. People leaned forward. For the first time, I was not shrinking. For the first time, their discomfort did not make me retreat. I said, "There is something everyone here needs to see." My father opened his mouth to object. I ignored him. I turned toward Aunt Karen. "Could you turn on the television, please?" She nodded and picked up the remote, still unaware of what was coming. As the screen flickered to life, I took the flash drive from my bag and handed it to her son Michael, who worked in IT, and had been connecting devices to that TV for years. "Sure thing," he said casually, plugging it in. My mother's face drained of color. My father's posture stiffened. Brent lowered his beer slowly. Monica's arms dropped to her sides. And just like that, the room shifted from holiday cheer to a countdown. I stood still, calm, ready. I had spent my entire life being silent. Today, I would not. The television blinked to a soft blue before the file loaded, and in the brief pause that followed, the air inside the living room tightened like a held breath. Every conversation had stopped completely. Someone set down a glass too loudly. Someone else whispered what is happening before being shushed. My heartbeat remained steady, not from numbness but from the calm certainty that the truth could stand on its own. When the footage finally filled the screen, the view of the Maple House checkout counter appeared exactly as I remembered. Bright light overhead, the stack of menus beside the register, the small bell used to call staff. And then my family walked into frame. My father first, his posture heavy with irritation. My mother beside him wearing that practiced mask of superiority. Monica scrolling her phone behind them. Brent smirking like he always did when he thought someone else would end up suffering in his place. Gasps rose around the room as relatives recognized them. I heard someone mumble, "Is that from Christmas dinner?" Another said, "Wait, where's Emily?" I kept my eyes on the screen. The audio kicked in clear and crisp. My father grumbled about the bill being too high. My mother responded with the sentence that had sliced through me like cold metal. "Emily will take care of this. She always does." The room reacted instantly. A low ripple of disbelief spread through the crowd. Aunt Karen's eyebrows shot up. Uncle Robert leaned forward, arms crossed tightly. My mother's hand flew to her throat as if she could physically swallow the words back down. But it was too late. The truth was already in the room. The cashier asked politely if someone else was coming to pay, and Monica rolled her eyes, letting out an impatient sigh before saying, "Yes, our sister is coming. She owes us. It is Christmas." This time the reaction was louder. A cousin muttered "holy hell" under her breath. Another whispered, "That is not right." I kept standing at the front of the room, hands clasped loosely in front of me, letting their voices wash over me without changing my expression. Then Brent stepped forward in the footage with that careless grin that made my stomach twist. "Do not worry," he told the cashier. "Emily said she would be here any minute. She is reliable. You know how she is." The room erupted with murmurs of outrage. My father shifted uncomfortably beside the sofa, his jaw clenching. My mother's eyes darted desperately around the room, searching for someone who might come to her defense, but no one did. The footage continued, and the moment that transformed the room from uncomfortable to horrified arrived with brutal clarity. Brent laughed loudly. "Remember when Dad slapped her and she cried for hours?" Monica added, "Yeah, she is still dramatic like that." Then my father on the recording said she has always been too emotional. The shock in the room was immediate and seismic. Someone gasped. Someone else stood up. Cousin Laura covered her mouth, eyes wide. Uncle Robert turned fully toward my father, his expression so intensely disapproving that even my father flinched. The rawness of their cruelty echoed in every corner of the room, amplified by the silence that followed it. When the footage showed my family gathering their coats, laughing as they walked out and left the bill behind, the living room fell completely still. The screen froze on the empty checkout counter after they exited. My cousin Michael muted the audio and looked at me waiting. I nodded. He removed the flash drive slowly as if handling something fragile. For the first time in my life, the room was on my side before I ever spoke. I stepped forward. My voice was even. "This is what happened on Christmas night. I was working a 12-hour shift. I had not been invited to dinner, but they told the restaurant I was on the way to pay for their meal. They left $1,200 for me to deal with." My mother opened her mouth, but no sound came out. My father tried to step forward, but Aunt Karen blocked him with a raised hand. "Sit down," she said. And he did for the first time in my life without arguing. The relatives who had always ignored the subtle fractures in our family dynamic were now staring at the wreckage, unable to pretend it was something else. The truth was too clear, too loud, too undeniable. Aunt Karen turned to my mother, her voice controlled but sharp. "You told the restaurant your daughter was coming to pay. Why?" My mother's cheeks flushed bright red. Well, it was a misunderstanding. We thought Emily planned to join." She stammered over the words, reaching for excuses that dissolved as soon as she spoke them. I kept my eyes on her. "I did not plan to join because I was not invited. And even if I had been, you still had no right to assign your bill to me." My father's face hardened the same expression he wore whenever he was about to lie. "We were going to settle it later. You are blowing this out of proportion." The room exploded with reactions. Uncle Robert snapped, "That is not what the video showed." Cousin Laura added, "You laughed about it." "I saw the whole thing." Monica tried to interject. "We were joking. People joke." No one looked convinced. Brent lifted his hands defensively. "Everyone calm down. It was not that serious." Aunt Karen turned on him sharply. "Not serious. You laughed about your father slapping your sister as a child. You all mocked her. You used her. You humiliated her." For a long time, I feared I would crumble if the truth ever came out. But standing there, hearing other people call out the things I had carried alone for years, I felt something inside me steady like a spinal column finally aligning. My mother whispered, "Emily, please do not do this. Family is family." I took a deep breath and responded with the most honest words I had ever said to her. Family does not mean being used. Family does not mean paying for everyone's mistakes. Family does not mean being the punching bag. I let my gaze sweep across all of them, meeting each pair of eyes that had avoided mine for so long. You have all treated me like I existed to serve you. You believed I would always stay quiet. You were wrong. The room erupted again, but this time it was not chaos. It was accountability, and for the first time I was not standing alone in the storm. The living room felt different now, charged with an energy I had never witnessed in my family before. Not chaos, not denial, not the usual quick scramble to shift blame, but something heavier, something my parents were not prepared to face. Accountability. Real, public, undeniable accountability. The kind that does not evaporate under excuses or half-hearted apologies. The kind that lands with weight because too many witnesses have already seen the truth. Aunt Karen stood at the center of it, her expression a mixture of disappointment and controlled fury. I had always known she sensed the dysfunction in our household, but I had never imagined she would put herself between me and my parents with such clarity. She turned fully toward my father. "I cannot believe what I just heard," she said. "You allowed your daughter to be spoken about that way. You laughed about hitting her." My father's face darkened as he tried to reassert some form of authority. "Karen, that was years ago, and she is exaggerating. It was nothing, a minor moment blown out of proportion." But the dismissiveness that had always worked in private failed here. Uncle Robert shook his head sharply. "Minor moment. You hit your kid, John. You bragged about it on camera. You let your children joke about it. That is not minor. That is disgusting." Brent bristled. "It was not bragging. It was just a memory. Everyone exaggerates old stories." But he stopped when he realized no one was backing him. The same cousins who used to laugh at his antics now watched him with visible disgust. My mother tried next, her voice cracking under pressure. "We were overwhelmed that night. The restaurant was busy. It seemed simpler for Emily to handle it later. You know she is reliable. That is how families work. They support each other." That sentence, spoken with trembling righteousness, ignited something in the room. Aunt Karen turned on her instantly. Support does not mean handing a $1,200 bill to someone who was not even invited. Support does not mean bullying her into being your financial safety net. Support does not mean humiliating her publicly on a holiday. Monica huffed, folding her arms tightly. "This is getting blown out of control. We all help each other sometimes. Emily helps more. That is not a crime. Emily is dramatic. She always has been." The word dramatic, spoken so casually, snapped whatever thin thread of patience remained in Michael, who had been silent until now. He stood from the armchair with a cold steadiness I did not expect. Dramatic. He repeated it as if testing the weight of the word. He pointed toward the television. "That video was not dramatic. That was cruelty. Plain and simple. You all humiliated her. You laughed about abuse. You stuck her with your bill because you are used to letting her pay for everything. That is not family. That is exploitation." A hush fell across the room, broken only by the uncomfortable shifting of my parents and siblings. Other relatives added their voices. Cousin Laura said, "I always felt like something was off about how you treated her, but this is worse than I imagined." Aunt Linda whispered Emily deserved better. Always did. And then Uncle Robert said the words that hit harder than anything else. "You all use her, and you enjoy using her." I watched the truth break across my parents' faces like cold water. They had run out of hiding places. They had run out of ways to twist the story. They had never been confronted collectively before, never forced to face the version of themselves that existed outside the walls of our home. My father gripped the back of a chair, knuckles white. He spoke with a strained voice that had lost its authority. "Emily, whatever this is, whatever story you are spinning, we can talk about it privately. Let us go outside. We will clear this up." It was a last attempt at control, at pulling me back into the shadows where power belonged to him. I steadied my breath, The room silent as everyone waited to see how I would respond. "No," I said. My voice did not rise. It did not tremble. It simply held the weight of years that had never been spoken aloud. "We are not discussing this privately. This did not happen privately. You made your choices in public. You talked about me in public. You humiliated me in public. This conversation stays right here." A few people murmured in agreement. I continued addressing them all. "You left a bill I could barely afford because you assume I will always figure it out. You talk about me like I am a burden, even though I am the one carrying all of you. You decided my life belonged to you. And when I finally said something, your first instinct was to deny, to lie, to minimize." My mother's eyes filled with tears, but they did not move me. I had seen too many weaponized tears in my life to mistake them for remorse. "We are family," she whispered. "You do not turn your back on family." That line, the same one she had used all my life to hold me in place, no longer worked. "Family does not get to demand loyalty without giving any in return," I said. "Family does not get to hurt you over and over and call it love. Family does not get to empty your pockets and break your heart and then hide behind blood." Aunt Karen nodded slowly, reinforcing my words. "She is right. You crossed every boundary imaginable, and you have been doing it for years." My father looked around the room, realizing no one was defending them. No one was rescuing them from the truth. He lowered himself onto the sofa, defeated in a way I had never seen. Brent stared at the floor. Monica looked like she wanted to vanish. The house was silent, the tension settling like dust in the beams of winter sunlight streaming through the window. For the first time in my life, they were the ones shrinking under the weight of accountability, not me. And for the first time, they understood that I was not the quiet child they could dismiss anymore. I was the adult who had finally found her voice, and I was not giving it back. The room settled into a heavy, stunned quiet, the kind that stretches across every wall like a shadow. For the first time in my life, my parents and siblings had nowhere left to run, no excuse strong enough to hide behind, no convenient narrative to rewrite. They had always counted on silence, on the unspoken rule that family dirty laundry stayed tucked away where outsiders could not see it. But today, their secrets had been dragged into the open, their voices preserved on a recording they could not deny. And now they were sitting in the ruins of the roles they had forced me into my entire life. I reached into my bag and pulled out the envelope containing the printed receipt from Maple House. The room watched with collective breath as I walked toward the center table and placed it down with deliberate calm. "This," I said, "is the last thing you will ever get from me." My mother's face crumpled. She lurched forward as if reaching for me, but Aunt Karen stepped subtly between us, a small protective gesture that spoke louder than any words. "Emily." "Please," my mother whispered. "You cannot mean that. We made a mistake. It was Christmas. You know how stressful holidays can be?" "Stressful," I repeated slowly, tasting the word. "You left a $1,200 bill with my name attached to it and laughed about it. You humiliated me. You mocked me. You talked about me like I was something you owned. That was not stress. That was cruelty." My father stood abruptly, his pride refusing to die quietly. "You cannot just walk away from your family. You owe us respect." I turned toward him with a clarity that came from years of surviving him. "Respect is earned, not demanded, and you lost mine a long time ago." He opened his mouth to argue, then caught sight of Uncle Robert's glare and Aunt Karen's disappointment. He shut it again, jaw tightening, but the fight drained out of him as quickly as it had risen. I realized then that for all his bluster, he was not used to being confronted by anyone except me. And now that the entire room stood between us, he looked smaller than I had ever seen him. Brent finally spoke, though his voice had none of the smugness it always carried. "So, what, you are just cutting us off? You think you are better than us now?" I met his eyes. "No, I think I am finally choosing myself. And choosing myself means walking away from people who treat me like a resource instead of a person." Monica scoffed weakly. "You are being dramatic, Emily. You cannot just erase us because of one mistake." "One Mistake. The words stirred something sharp inside me. You used me for years. You took my money, my time, my labor, my peace. You mocked me behind my back. You watched me be hurt and stayed silent. And now that you are facing consequences, you call it one mistake. She looked away, flush rising to her cheeks. For once, she had no clever retort, no dismissive jab to throw back. I continued, my voice steady and clear. I am done paying for your choices. I am done being blamed for your failures, and I am done accepting the version of family where love means sacrifice but never support. My mother began crying soft, pitiful tears meant to evoke sympathy. In the past, they would have worked. In the past, I would have folded. But now they only reminded me of every time she used her sadness as a shield while ignoring mine. She reached out again. Emily, please. We can fix this. We can talk. We can move past it. I took a small step back. I am not interested in fixing a relationship built on harm. I am not interested in carrying you anymore. I am not interested in going back. My father exhaled sharply, anger flickering in his eyes. You are ungrateful, after everything we did for you. A bitter laugh escaped me. You did nothing for me, except teach me how to survive pain you caused. The relatives in the room shifted uncomfortably. Some nodded. Some stared at the floor. All of them understood the truth now. There was no spinning it, no patching it, no smoothing it over. I picked up my bag from where it rested by the couch. As I moved toward the door, Aunt Karen touched my arm lightly. You do what you need to, sweetheart. You deserve better than this. Her voice was soft but firm solid in a way that steadied me. I managed a small smile. Thank you. She squeezed my hand. You are not alone. And that meant more than I could say. I turned toward the rest of the room. I am leaving now. I wish you all a peaceful holiday. Then I looked directly at my parents and siblings. But my peace will not include any of you. The finality in my tone left no room for misinterpretation. My mother sobbed harder. My father stared at me as if seeing a stranger. Brent shifted his jaw, trying to mask the sting of losing control. Monica wiped at her mascara, still trying to hold on to the illusion that she had done nothing wrong. I opened the front door, letting in a rush of cold winter air. The sky outside had darkened and snowflakes drifted lazily through the glow of the porch light. For a brief moment, the contrast between the warmth inside and the icy quiet outside felt symbolic. One held the past, the other held freedom. I stepped into the cold without hesitating. As the door shut behind me, a sense of final clarity settled in my chest, deeper than anger, deeper than grief. It was the quiet certainty that walking away was not an act of cruelty. It was self-preservation. It was the first honest gift I had ever given myself. The cold air outside Aunt Karen's house wrapped around me like a cleansing shock, sharp enough to sting, but steady enough to remind me that I was alive and no longer trapped in the suffocating cycle I had lived in for years. The snow crunched beneath my boots as I walked to my car, each step carrying the weight of a past I had finally decided not to drag with me any longer. When I closed the door and sat behind the wheel, I expected my hands to shake, or a sob to claw its way up my throat. Instead, I felt a deep stillness, a quiet that seemed to fill every inch of my chest. It was not the numbness of shock or the hollow silence that trauma leaves behind. It was something gentler, steadier, a silence that felt like healing. I drove home through streets lined with twinkling Christmas lights, the kind that used to make me feel painfully lonely. Tonight they felt different. Not cheerful, not warm, but neutral, like they finally belonged to the world again instead of being tied to memories of stress, guilt, and obligation. Snow fell in soft waves, blurring the edges of houses and storefronts, casting the world in a muted glow that made everything feel distant but peaceful. My condo greeted me with its familiar quiet, the hum of the heater kicking on as I stepped inside and shook snow from my coat. I hung my keys on the hook by the door, a simple routine that had always felt insignificant, but now carried a strange sense of triumph. This home, small and modest as it was, belonged entirely to me. Not because someone handed it to me, not because someone expected something in return, but because I had built it piece by piece through my own effort. I set my bag down on the kitchen table and stood for a moment in the dim light, letting the quiet settle into my bones. For years, silence had been something I feared. It reminded me of walking on eggshells, of waiting for footsteps in the hallway, of bracing for anger I could not control. But now the silence inside my condo felt like an embrace, a space untouched by the demands and expectations that once consumed me. I made tea, the kind with cinnamon and chamomile, that filled the air with a soft, calming scent. I carried the mug to the living room and curled up on the couch, tucking a blanket around my legs. For the first time in a long while, I allowed myself to feel tired. Not the exhausted kind that comes from emotional labor, but a natural weariness that comes at the end of a difficult but necessary day. As the tea warmed my hands, my thoughts drifted back to the gathering, to the stunned faces, to the accountability that finally landed, to the moment I walked out and realized I no longer owed my family anything. A part of me wondered what they were saying now, how they were spinning the story to make themselves feel better. But the thought came and went without that old familiar sting. Whatever they thought, whatever version they told it, was no longer mine to carry. I was free from that responsibility, too. The next morning, I awoke without the usual heaviness that tugged at me after holidays. The air in my condo felt lighter, the sunlight soft as it filtered through the blinds. I fed my cat, drank water, stretched my stiff shoulders, and let the quiet morning unfold at its own pace. Later, I drove to the EMS station for my shift. When I walked through the doors, my partner glanced up from his coffee. "You okay?" he asked casually, but with a note of genuine concern. I surprised myself by smiling. "Yeah," I said. "For once, I think I actually am." The day brought its usual challenges: a fall on an icy driveway, a man experiencing chest pain at a grocery store, a teenager with a broken wrist from sledding. The work was intense, but my mind felt strangely clear, more focused than it had been in weeks. I found myself breathing easier during calls, responding with a steadiness that came not from suppressing emotion, but from finally letting go of a weight that had been dragging behind me for years. At lunch, I sat in the break room scrolling through messages from coworkers wishing me a belated Merry Christmas. A few sent photos of their families smiling around tables where laughter came without conditions. Instead of feeling envy, I felt possibility. The world was bigger than the people who had hurt me, and I had a place in it. That evening, after my shift ended, I stopped at a small hardware store and bought a string of soft white lights. When I got home, I hung them along the top of my living room window. A simple decoration, something I had seen in neighbors' windows every year, but never bothered to do for myself. When I plugged them in, the lights glowed warmly against the glass, reflecting faintly in the quiet room. It felt like reclaiming something I had lost. Not Christmas, not family, but hope. Over the next few days, I allowed myself to rest in ways I had forgotten were possible. I took long showers, letting the hot water melt tension from muscles that had been clenched for years. I cooked meals that reminded me of comfort rather than obligation. I read a book I had been too exhausted to start. And I slept, truly slept, without waking from dreams filled with guilt or the echo of raised voices. Healing did not come all at once. It arrived in moments, small ones, almost imperceptible, like noticing how quiet my breathing sounded in the morning, like realizing I could sit on my couch without feeling the need to brace for the next demand, like recognizing that I no longer apologized when I had done nothing wrong. I began to understand that walking away was not abandonment. It was self-respect. It was choosing a version of life where love did not require self-erosion. I did not know what the future held or whether my family would ever understand the damage they caused. But for the first time, the uncertainty did not scare me. It felt like a clean slate, quiet, honest, mine. If you are still here with me listening to the quiet turn my life took after years of being the one who carried everything, then maybe something in this story echoed a part of your own. Maybe you grew up learning that love meant sacrifice, that silence kept the peace, that keeping the family together mattered more than keeping yourself whole. Maybe you spent holidays pretending everything was fine, while the weight of unspoken expectations pressed so hard on your chest you could barely breathe. Or maybe, like me, you were taught to be the responsible one, the reliable one, the one who never complains, the one who pays the bill literally and emotionally. And maybe you are tired. I want you to hear me clearly. Choosing yourself is not selfish. It is survival. The world is full of people who will take advantage of kindness if you let them. Not because your kindness is wrong, but because they assume it has no limits. They assume you will always say yes. They assume you will tolerate disrespect in the name of family. They assume you will keep showing up even when showing up hurts. And when someone assumes your loyalty is guaranteed no matter how they treat you, that is not love. That is entitlement. I learned something important this Christmas. Being underestimated gives you room to grow quietly. It gives you time to understand the patterns that shaped you. It gives you clarity to see who benefits from your exhaustion. And it gives you the courage to step away when the cost of staying becomes too high. Walking away does not mean you hate them. It does not mean you wish them harm. It simply means you finally understand that protecting your peace matters more than protecting someone else's comfort. People will tell you that family is everything, and for some people that is true. But for others, family is a battlefield they never asked to enter, a place where affection comes with conditions, a place where apologies are rare and accountability is non-existent. If you grew up in a home where love and fear lived side by side, you know exactly what I mean. Healing is not loud. It is not dramatic. It does not arrive with fireworks or applause. Healing happens in the quiet moments after you finally draw a boundary and refuse to step back over it. It happens the first night you sleep without bracing for the sound of someone else's anger. It happens when you realize you can breathe without waiting for the next obligation to fall on your shoulders. It happens slowly, softly, patiently. And it belongs to you. If you are listening from a small apartment, a busy city, a rural town, a quiet street with Christmas lights still hanging, even though the holiday has passed, know this, you are allowed to start over. At 28, at 50, at 70, you are allowed to break a cycle that began long before you were born. You are allowed to say no to traditions that harm you. You are allowed to stop paying the emotional bill that generations before you handed down like a family heirloom. You are allowed to choose peace over loyalty, and you are allowed to walk away even when they say you are ungrateful. Gratitude does not require self-abandonment. Love does not require you to shrink yourself so others feel bigger. Family does not give someone the right to wound you without consequence. You deserve relationships where respect is mutual, where apologies are real, where love does not hurt, where your presence is not taken for granted. If hearing my story brought up anger or sadness or memories you thought you had buried, take a moment to sit with that. Not to punish yourself, not to reopen old wounds, but to recognize how far you have come and how much further you are allowed to go. You deserve a life that feels like yours, a life where you wake up without dread, a life where the holidays are not something you survive, but something you shape on your own terms. Whatever part of my story resonated with you, I hope it gave you permission to reconsider the things you have been accepting for too long. I hope it reminded you that pain is not a requirement for belonging. I hope it showed you that boundaries are not walls, but doors you choose when to open. And more than anything, I hope it gave you the courage to believe that your voice matters even if it shakes. Now I want to hear from you. Where are you listening from? What part of this story stayed with you? What memory surfaced when the camera footage played? What moment made you pause? Your voice matters here. Your story matters here. And if you found something in this truth, something that helped you breathe a little easier or see your own life more clearly, consider sharing this video with someone who might need it. Someone who has been carrying the weight alone. Someone who has been paying bills they never owed. Someone who needs to be reminded that choosing themselves is allowed. Thank you for spending this time with me, for witnessing my story, for holding the quiet with me. 2 more life stories are waiting for you on this channel. And until we meet again, I hope you find peace in places you were once told to endure. You deserve that peace. You always have.